Hi, and welcome back to Authentically ADHD. I am your host, Carmen. I'm a late diagnosed ADHDer, an early childhood special educator, and a certified life and performance coach. I created this podcast to help as many ADHDers as I could to learn about your specific ADHD. I know that when I was late diagnosed, I was sent out the door with meds and no help. We have to do a lot of this work on our own, but if we join together in community, we can live more authentically and with more joy in our lives. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, my friend, and welcome back to the podcast. How are you? I'm hanging in there. I mean, can you believe it's February already? Time sure does fly when you're time blind. Okay, that was a bad joke, but I thought it was pretty funny when I was writing this, I guess. So, today we are diving into a topic that is deeply personal and incredibly powerful. Advocacy and autonomy when you have ADHD. And for those of us who are neurodiverse, these two concepts are vital to successfully navigate the world around us while being our true selves. It's also very difficult for us to wrap our minds around these topics and ideas. And there's some degree of self-confidence and self-worth involved when using your autonomy and advocating for yourself or someone else. So, are you ready? Let's get started. We're going to start with advocacy. The definition of advocacy is standing up for yourself or others, ensuring that your or their needs and rights are being respected and or met. This may sound simple, but for us ADHDers, it can feel like an uphill battle. Many of us have spent years and sometimes even decades hearing that we are too much, not enough, too messy, too dramatic, etc., etc. We've been labeled, dismissed, and misunderstood, which can lead to feelings of loneliness, helplessness, and just plain old isolation. So advocating for ourselves can feel incredibly intimidating. But here's some good news. Advocacy starts with awareness, and you've already started that first step. Advocacy, it was really always something that felt super hard for me. It was hard to wrap my mind around the concept, but when I had to go in and get my own diagnosis and advocate for the right treatment, I had already started advocating for myself. But it gets harder for doing it and advocating for yourself when it means involving other people and asking for help and or accommodations. I want to really validate how emotional this process can be. Like I've learned, it can be very difficult and intimidating even if you've done it before. Like I said, I didn't even realize that I had advocated for myself in the past when I had come to a point that I needed to advocate for myself again, and I needed to do it intentionally. Now, was I gaining my diagnosis intentionally? Yes, but I didn't realize that I was advocating for myself. I didn't realize that's what it was. So, to help me map out advocating for myself, I now think about it in 3 steps. First is awareness, second is articulation, and 3 is action. Yes, they all start with an A. It's easier to remember. The first step is awareness. This is basically understanding your unique ADHD brain and what it needs to thrive. Are you a person that needs structure? Are you a person that needs more flexibility? Do you need clear communication? Deadline reminders? Figure out what these things are. And then the next step is articulation. That is literally what it sounds like. turning those needs into words or requests depending on who you are asking this accommodation from, basically. Like is it for work? Is it for a relationship? Is it for school? Putting it into words that fit the situation. And finally, action. Being sure that your needs and rights are met and followed through on, whether it's in a relationship, at work, or at school. Now, I remember the first time I had to advocate for my needs at work intentionally, but after my diagnosis, and realizing that I needed a little bit more help at work besides just my treatment. I felt like a weak person, always burning out, and I felt like I was bad at my job. But all I really needed was accommodations. So I asked myself, what is it that I needed? I put it into words, I did that articulation, and I did the paperwork needed to be sure it would be followed through on, and I wasn't met with shame. I was met with understanding and support. Advocacy is not about demanding special treatment, and although it might be scary, it is not always met with shame. It can be met with understanding and support. It's actually maybe a little bit of a red flag if it's met with shame, because it's not about demanding special treatment. Now, if you feel like you're demanding special treatment, you're doing it wrong. We are not trying to do that. We're not demanding anything. We are leveling the playing field because we're not trying to live up to those standards of the neurotypical world, because we are unable to because we're neurodiverse. So let's shift gears and talk about autonomy. Autonomy is the ability to make choices and decisions independently. This is another thing that's difficult for us because it involves creating systems, routines, and habits that work for our specific brains, not forcing ourselves to meet the neurotypical standards. Now, a lot of us also grew up without autonomy because we grew up in ADHD households. We were not trusted. Again, we were told we were too much, too dramatic. I didn't get my license until I was 18 years old. I was a bad driver. I validate that now. But again, my autonomy that was taken away from me. Now, was it taken away from me on purpose because I was a bad driver? No, that wasn't the only reason. It's because I live in a family of people who have ADHD who are very unaware of the fact that they have ADHD. And we all procrastinate and we all do the same things, meaning I was almost 18 before I got my driver's license. Probably safer and better for everybody. But autonomy means embracing the fact that you have ADHD as a part of who you are, and that it's not something to be fixed. Just like me being a bad driver, it was not me fixing my ADHD so I could be a better driver. It was me leveling the playing field with treatment so that I could drive more safely, so that I physically got in less accidents and got less tickets. By the way, that's real data. Before being treated for ADHD, or in my 20s, from 18 to somewhere in my mid-20s, I was in, 6 or 7 accidents, including fender benders and 1 car accidents, meaning my car and my car only, and tickets. And afterwards, only one, just one, in the last 10 years. Yep. So that's the physical evidence that I have about driving. But it's understanding that and not shaming yourself for not being able to live up to neurotypical standards. It's about realizing that you need support and finding out what works for you. Treatment, accommodations, reminders, systems, and habits, and then using them without shame. Autonomy also involves some self-trust. You have to trust in yourself that you know what's best for you. That you and only you know what's really best for you, even though others may not understand. I've learned that stating my needs clearly and kindly without oversharing works if I feel the need to explain why, for example, I leave the building for my lunch breaks, or why I journal with check-in pages throughout the day, or why my morning routine is so long. Autonomy is a super abstract concept, so here is a metaphor that I like to think of to help us understand. So I like to think of autonomy like driving a car. Ha ha ha. Funny joke, right? No, it's not actually a joke. It just really helps me because driving a car is something that is hard for me even while I'm medicated. So when you're the driver, you decide the destination, the speed, and the route. Advocacy is about making sure the car is equipped with the tools you need. A GPS, something I always need, a full tank of gas, or at least enough gas to get where you're going, and maybe some snacks for the road if it's going to be a while. When you put the two things together, advocacy and autonomy allow you to navigate, journey your life like on your terms. When you don't have any advocacy and you don't have autonomy and you're the driver and you maybe decide the destination and you decide the speed, but then you go a little lead foot and you go off route because you're impulsive, then it feels like you are living life on someone else's terms, okay? And that's something that we don't want to do. We want to live life on our terms, all right? So in the next segment, we are going to deep dive into some strategies to build the skills of advocacy and autonomy. Hi, did you know that Patreon helps podcasters like me through listener support? That's right. By joining the Patreon, not only do you get so many of my resources, early release to episodes, and free coaching, you're also supporting the cost of creating the podcast that you love listening to. Let's start building our own ADHD community today in my Patreon. The link is down in the show notes. Hope to see you over there. Okay, now back to the show. So now that we've talked about what advocacy and autonomy are, let's talk about how we build these skills. And let's start with advocacy. So the first one for advocacy is practicing self-reflection. I know a lot of these are going to make you cringe and make you, do the little face, the lemon face. But I promise you that as cheesy as they sound, they are things that work. Okay, so take time to identify your strengths, challenges, and needs. Journaling, using voice memos, therapy, or talking with a friend can help you process these thoughts. The number two one that I have, the second one that I have is learn the language. Get comfortable with terms and phrases that help you articulate your ADHD experience. Instead of saying, I'm bad at deadlines, try saying, I thrive with clear timelines and accountability. Or instead of saying, I suck at following through, say, I thrive with clear deadlines and reminders. These things help show our strengths instead of talking about ourselves as at a deficit. A deficit mindset like that can make you feel small, and it can really, really dampen your autonomy and advocacy. So saying it in a way that says, I thrive with, or I work well with, instead of saying I suck at or I'm bad at, is a much better way to state something about yourself than the other way. And it helps with feeling more confident in your advocacy. And number 3, start small. Advocacy doesn't always have to be big. Bold statement, I know. It can be as simple as asking a coworker to send you meeting notes or requesting a quiet workspace. It could be as simple as buying a pair of loops online and using them at work and not saying anything to anybody, because it's a law under the ADA that you are allowed to wear, noise canceling or whatever types of accommodations that you need, as long as you've disclosed your ADHD to your workplace. And yes, I'm referring to myself. I bought loops and I use them, and I did not have to disclose anything to anybody because I've already informed my worker, my administration, that I have ADHD. So if they were to ask me what's in your ear, I'd explain what it was, and then hopefully we'd just go back both. Oh, those are cool, and go back to our days. Now, it would be different if they were to say something to me that, about them that was like, take those out or you can't use those. I'd understand if it was like a headphone or something that I was using, because that's what I used to have to use. But then I got loops, and loops are under the ADA, which is the Accommodations for Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's when you have a disability, that's the law. They have to follow certain laws. And this is a little bit where autonomy kicks in, because some people might be approached and told to take these loops out, and they may not say anything and just take them out. Autonomy does mean standing up for yourself in saying, no, under the ADA law, I am allowed to wear these because I've disclosed to you that I have ADHD. And here's the email. I would suggest that you follow up any verbal conversations with emails. Here's the email that says that I did so. So let's talk about the 3 tips for autonomy. That was like a bonus one. Number 1, experiment. Try different tools, strategies, and systems to find what works for you. Remember, it's okay if something doesn't stick. Keep experimenting until you find your groove and what works for you. Be persistent about it, or it's not going to work, okay? And I didn't say consistent. I said persistent. That means just keep getting up. You can stay on the ground for a minute. You can stay there and wallow, feel your feelings, and then reassess, readjust, and try again. Number 2, set boundaries. Autonomy often requires saying no to things that don't serve you, and this can be really tough. But boundaries are essential for protecting your time, energy, and mental health. My accommodation at work is a boundary. I need a certain amount of days off a month in order to not burn out, in order to protect my energy, my mental health, and my time, in order to get coaching and to go to the doctor and do all of those things and not burn myself out. Number 3, celebrate your wins. Every time you take a step toward autonomy or toward anything that is a step forward in the right direction or in the direction you want to go, celebrate it. Whether it's creating a new routine or advocating for a need or just completing a routine, celebrate it. Acknowledge your growth and process, because it is a big deal. As much as your brain wants to tell you it's not, it is. Advocacy in action. Advocacy doesn't just happen in personal settings. It's also about creating systemic change. Advocacy, I could talk. We're almost there. ADHD and advocacy can look like this: educating others about ADHD to reduce the stigma, pushing for workplace accommodations or policy changes, supporting ADHD-focused organizations or initiatives. All of these things are helping ADHD and advocacy. You listening to this podcast and me creating this podcast is ADHD advocacy. Remember, advocacy doesn't have to be perfect or polished. Sometimes it's messy and uncomfortable, but I promise you it's always worth it. As we close in today's episode, I want to leave you with this. Advocacy and autonomy are lifelong journeys. They're not destinations that you arrive at and check off a list. They're skills that you build, refine, and adapt as you grow. They are our life's work. Whether you're just starting to advocate for yourself or you're deep in the work of creating an autonomous life, know that you're not alone. You're part of a community of resilient, resourceful individuals who are rewriting the narrative around ADHD. It's no longer a deficit, okay? It might be a disability, but we can manage. And if you found today's episode helpful, I'd love to hear from you. My link tree is down below. And I love to hear, what does advocacy and autonomy look like in your life? What does it mean? Share your thoughts with me, or share the podcast on social media, or leave a review. And as always, thank you for tuning in to Authentically ADHD. That's all I have for now. Stay authentic, and we will talk soon.